Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Build It Better. Today we're going to be talking about some pretty amazing things. I'm so excited. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet.
And my name is Adam Barrett, and you can follow me at Adam L. Barrett.
Well, you dropped your Fediverse.
Yeah. I had the Fediverse up, and then we switched it for some reason. I can't remember.
We did?
Yeah. Well,
I'm Jesse. You can find me on the Fediverse, Jesse at cogwheel.social.
Yes.
As long as my instance is still up.
And today we have Ben, but Ben is not co-hosting today.
No, he's not a co-host.
Ben, we are interviewing, we are grilling, we are getting down to the very deep depths of the places that Ben goes in his sleep at midnight, at 2 a.m., where nobody knows, and then all of a sudden RxJS is better.
The Fediverse.
That's what happens, right? Yeah.
I just wanted to say Fediverse. Everyone else had said it.
I'm so thankful it went back into a tech place. I didn't know where we were going, but I got frightened.
You know, I'm in the Fediverse. I get notifications that I'm in the Fediverse. I just don't log on to the Fediverse. But I'm.
Is that why there's like a white background and just a plant? Is that all that's there?
She hasn't logged in, so she doesn't have legs.
It's like that construct in the Matrix where it's just like a big white space.
Yes, with a plant.
Yeah, I need a plant.
Okay, so Ben, you're doing some cool stuff with RxJS, and I'm super excited to go deep because, you know, people love that stuff. They love it.
We do.
Yeah, I do. I get excited about it. Well, what would you like to know?
Well, is RxJS still relevant? Do we still need RxJS?
Oh God, the worst question ever.
Is it dying? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it is. I feel like it's probably talked about less and less now, but like it's used more and more. Like it's on an upward trajectory, and a lot of people are using it, or it's used in a lot of very popular dependencies. The use of observables even outside of RxJS is getting more and more traction and popularity because of popular libraries that use them internally. But yeah, it's I would say it's not like maybe not like it was when I first started, because it was like then it was like a lot of people didn't know about it, and when something's newish, like it's, you know, oh, it's the hot new thing. Like right now, there's a lot of people like, oh, React is long in the tooth, blah, and then everyone's still using it. It's going gangbusters. Like
React is what? Long in the tooth?
Yeah, long in the tooth.
It means you're
long
old.
in the tooth?
Yep.
It means old.
Honestly, if you know the phrase long in the tooth, it probably means you're old too. So there's that. It's kind of meta, but yeah, it means it's old.
Meta in the Fediverse.
Are we playing buzzword bingo? Did I not get a card?
Okay, so you said that observables, though, are kind of used in a bunch of different places, and you sort of separated that from RxJS. So, like, what do you mean when you're separating observables from RxJS?
Oh, okay. So observable is just a really primitive type. Like anyone could build an observable, and they're just a thing of a certain shape where you're like, okay, you have this contract where you say, I want to subscribe to a thing, and you give me a bunch of events and tell me when it's done, or you give me a bunch of values and tell me when it's done, or you tell me if it errors, and you give me some means of unsubscribing. And that could be a lot of different shapes, but that contract specifically is the thing. And it usually also involves the ability to like have some setup and tear down in there. And so if you look at a lot of libraries, you'll see like TRPC actually has an observable implementation.
Snap.
Yeah.
So that one on my bingo card.
Svelte has an observable implementation that was so close to Rx's that was like one line of code to make RxJS's work. You know, what else? React Router has an observable implementation under the hood.
And so is this just like the observer pattern, if we were talking in patterns, or is this like more specific to like an API contract with subscribe?
Sure. So like the observer pattern is like a subject, well, basically an RxJS subject, and an observer. Basically an RxJS observer, right? And so what you do is you have like this observer that's got like a next method on it, and you give it to some subject that registers it in a list, like the RxJS thing. And then when you next into the subject, it then nexts on all the observers that have been registered to it. Now, an observable is like a bridge between those two things. It's a basic pattern, because what you can do with an observable is you can wrap a subject, anything that you can say, hey, I want to listen to what this thing's doing, and you can pass it along to observers. And what that means is you have this monadic thing where you can wrap an observable inside another observable, inside another observable, and so on and so on. So when you subscribe to one, it subscribes to the previous one, which subscribes to the previous one, which subscribes to the previous one, which subscribes to some subject, and pumps all of that through to the observer at the end. So it's a way of like taking the subject observer pattern from the observer pattern and adding a functional bridge between the observer and the subject. So
you
yeah,
threw out the word monad, but I'm not going to make you do that because we're not going to get into that.
It's a burrito. That's all you need to know.
It's a burrito.
It's just a burrito.
So now, okay, so we got that. We got RxJS as like an implementation of that, and then everybody knows about RxJS and the thousands of operators. So what's going on with RxJS? What's maybe happening in the news?
Let's see. I mean, right now, the big thing that's happened is we've wrapped up all new developments on version 7. So if there's bug fixes, I mean, honestly, if there was a bug fix that came to me for version 6, I would patch it, like if there was a legitimate one, but we haven't had any that are worth merging for that. But like, so it's in version 7 is in maintenance mode. It's still the latest version. And version 8 has been, we've had like alpha releases of it for a while, but it's like the development of it is kind of started in earnest. We've had some really good contributions as far as like helping, like version 8, the main goal of version 8 is 2 things. And the first thing is let's remove all the long deprecated APIs that we have. Like there's tons and tons of just a lot of code inside of RxJS that exists to accommodate deprecated APIs. And the reason we want to remove them in a lot of cases to make things lighter weight. Things like we don't want to be passing schedulers to every little thing when you can schedule things with like the scheduled observable and these other things, especially since scheduling is kind of an edge case. Like most people don't need scheduling. So there's stuff like that. The result selectors that have been there for a long time. It's just mountains. There's been, I don't even know, a dozen or more pull requests already landed as far as removing stuff. And it's just deleting piles and piles of code and simplifying the library quite a bit.
And the end goal of that is to reduce size mostly?
It's to reduce size, hopefully reduce confusion, just to simplify the library a bit. Like honestly, if I could get away with removing some of the operators, I would, but the fact that they're tree shakeable and the fact that they're pretty lightweight and you don't really have to do much with them. I mean, there's only so many ways to implement expand map or whatever. Like,
But is this what you're doing, Ben, by the way? Sorry for interrupting. It's like what you're doing, kind of like making it so you're kind of eliminating the need for Redux to come up with like their own observable pattern. Like, will this make it easier for them to kind of like pull in and just use observable? Or
so this not yet. So like just removing the deprecated stuff that's half of what we want to do in version 8. The other half of what we want to do is exactly what you're talking about, which is we want to take the library and split it into individual packages. Now the main library, the RxJS library, will still exist. I'm not telling people they're going to have to like change their npm package JSON or whatever. Like you'll still be able to import RxJS and use it as is, but we want to publish like an @RxJS observable package that only has observable and what you need for observables in it. And the main driver there is I have seen so many implementations of observable in like other people's libraries, spring up in other people's code. And when I asked them like, hey, why didn't you just use Rx for this? Like half the people that are dealing with this are Angular users or something. They already have an observable implementation. Like why bother making them bundle 2, especially considering this one, seems to have bugs in it or whatever that I can see. And their answer is always like, well, I just don't want all of RxJS in there. No, it's tree shakeable, but if you look at like how some of these bundle size calculators look at stuff, it'll be like, oh, well, this library pulls in this other huge dependency, and I'm going to do some really rough math and not really consider the fact that this is tree shaken. And, so there's things like that, or maybe they just don't want their users having access to this whole API of operators, because people tend to tie themselves in knots with these things. Like it's an understandable concern. And I just think to myself, well, fine, like if you just had this, if we could just standardize, like everyone just have one observable, great. So this is part of that, is to try to be like, well, here's the leanest, smallest observable we can get out. And that actually might even take a couple versions. I mean, there might be things like right now our observable has a lift method on it, which part of the reason it existed was to get around the fact that closures were slow a long time ago when this was written as version 5. There's things we can do to get around needing that, and maybe it's time that we do that. So it's just a matter of trying to move us towards like publishing the smallest, lightest observable on its own that we possibly can, and then making sure the rest of our library is built around that. So
it feels to me like when I'm thinking about observable, the smallest possible thing of observable, it seems like a really simple thing, right? You've got this, object that can kind of like take some subscribers, and those subscribers are either functions or objects, I guess, if you're holding that same pattern, and then return I guess it's a subscription in RxJS. In a lot of the other libraries, I guess like Svelte, like you named, and whatever, it's just a function to call and subscribe. But we have a full subscription object that has more features than that in RxJS, right? So would that be the pattern that you want to keep following? Because it seems like that would be a very minimal amount of code, right? And then you start to layer things on top of that.
So, I mean, the pattern being like return a function instead of a subscription, or
no, I just mean like, sorry, just the idea that we just are going to have like an object that holds a set of subscribers, and you call subscribe on it with either an object or a function, and then you also return a subscription.
So yeah, like, I mean, the pattern is going to still be the same, where you have, you say new observable, you provide to it some initialization function that gets called when you subscribe, gets a subscriber, all the rest of the API in there. I don't see a reason to change it. It is what it is. And like
I was going to say, my leading question, I guess, is, so where does it get complex then? Because there seems to be a lot of code in RxJS.
Right. So the complexity in RxJS, a lot of it originally was complexity just around our API's surface area being too broad. So for example, you used to be able to call subscription, and even in version 7, you can do this, but it's deprecated. You can call subscription with 3 functions or 2 functions or 1 function or an object or nothing at all, right? And like in version 8, you can call it with 1 function or 1 object or nothing at all. That's it. And so there's all the code that had to reconcile those things is gone. Other bits and pieces of it are things like, converting to an observable with from, like took a scheduler, and scheduler had this, like, if there was a scheduler, then take this path over here, otherwise take this path. And like half of that code's gone because we took the scheduler off of it. So, but that's still available. You can use a scheduled thing, and that's exactly what that is. But there's a lot of it was just weird complexity. There's other complexity around, assumptions that in the past you were able to be like, oh, if I access this inside of your observer, like handler, I get access to, what was it? I think you get the access to the actual subscriber or something like that. There's some weird things in there that existed from version 5 that we thought were really good ideas at the time, but then no one ever used them. And so those things have been declared legacy and removed. And like there was flags to be like, oh, we're still allowing this, but what that means, you have to keep the code in there if the flag is flipped. So once we get rid of those flags, then those deprecated code paths go away. And it makes the code a lot neater. So the real complexity in observable is like all the guarantees. Like the only complexity that should be there are just all the guarantees around like, oh, I can't next if I've already completed, or, if I call error 3 times, like you get the first error and then we report the other 2 errors to some other API. So that way they're not just lost, right? There's things like that, and that make it safe for the consumer. But the other thing is, like beyond RxJS, I really want to get to where I can come up with some sort of standard, remember the A+ test for promises? So like if we had a standardized test for observables, it was like, all right, if you have an observable API, like the consumer side should be shaped like this. And if the creation side should be shaped like this. So like a lot of people just want to be like, I want to publish something where you can consume like an observable, and that should pass a test that is very basic and, checks things like it won't call, like you're never calling complete twice or whatever. Like it should meet those criteria. And then if we have a test like that, then we can say, okay, something's subscribable. The symbol observable thing, we might be able to get rid of that. We can just be like, oh, well, you gave me a subscribable, like eventable in RxJS. We're just going to deal with it because we're just going to assume it has to pass this test, and we can give you a test like that you can pass, and our observable should pass that test. Now, the other side of it is like, if you want to create your own observable that does new observable, just like new promise or whatever, there's a separate battery of tests around that. Like you have to make sure that those things are safe. And if somebody else wants to write like the next greatest observable library against that and beat me, great. That's so good. Good luck to you. Like I will enjoy my free time.
And then Ben can finally retire. Yeah. Please do it. Please
retire
do it now.
on his mountain of internet money.
Yeah, all my open source money.
And if that
money.
Like A+ test suite for observable really existed, that might even help along the standards process, because the observable proposal like has kind of like died on the vine, right? Like for the ECMA standard.
It is sitting on the vine, withered and mostly dead. Yeah. Like
is it above or below like decorations?
Well, decorations I think are 3 now, right?
Yeah, so it's way below. It's way below. So it was never denied at the time, though. At the time, in their defense, observables weren't that widely used, and since then, a whole bunch of very smart people working on very amazing projects have separately, individually made observables, and not even I think or even realized they made observables. They weren't like, oh, I'm making observables, but then a guy like me goes and looks and is like, oh, look. It's got a subscribe method by a slightly different name that returns a subscription by a slightly different name, and takes some callbacks.
Subscribey and observability
stores or whatever. Do you think that's because a lot of them deal with like state, like they're like one step higher than observable? They're like, if you observable is like an event stream, then if you have an event stream and you can store one variable, now you've got a stateful event stream, and most of those start there, right? Like a Svelte story, it's more like a behavior subject than it is an observable, right?
Sure. I mean, I think what it is a lot of libraries want reactivity for the ergonomics that it provides, and or just for like view updates or whatever. And so what they end up doing is coming up with a minimal API for getting a bunch of values and knowing when it's done, or in some cases just getting a bunch of values and not caring when it's done because it never ends. And they reinvent observable, and some of them will be like, oh, maybe I'll use abort signal because that exists everywhere instead of a subscription. And then they come to the realization that I have recently where I tried to use it heavily in a different project, and it's just too slow, like registering add event listener, remove event listener for abort, and everything was just really pokey. So they end up being like, oh, all right, I need a different thing for this, and they end up making something roughly like a subscription, where you register a bunch of things and you call abort or unsubscribe or cancel or whatever they call it on it, and it kills it. Or they make a function where it wraps like a set of functions that they then loop over and call each function. And yeah, it's a whole thing. I've seen every pattern multiple times in different people's code. So
what's the best one? What's the best pattern of all the ones you've seen?
The one that you can maintain and test is the best. Ideally, the one you didn't have to write is the best. So, yeah.
So getting back to RxJS in particular, so you were talking about maybe I'm extrapolating too far, but maybe getting rid of this lift. So lift is something that is used in operators, right? Which basically, as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, lift gives you that possible behavior where an operator just is a function. Basically, it takes an observable and returns an observable, and you can do something in between there. And lift allows you to do something like, well, if I got a particular type of observable, like a behavior subject, then I can know that this is going to return a particular type of observable, like a behavior subject, rather than just a generic observable.
Yeah, sort of. So that's part of it. So that's one thing it provided, and we discovered that was like brand new in RxJS 5. maybe a bit experimental, and honestly, not a lot of people used it or even realized you could use it. In part because most people use it with TypeScript. TypeScript didn't really support this sort of variadic types that you would need to get that to work, because it's like, all right, so you're telling me that if you give me a behavior subject and you've got this thing, then I'm going to return a behavior subject. Like that wasn't really a thing that we could do at the time. We might have been able to do it once we moved to pipeable stuff, but at that point the ship had already said like no one was using that functionality. So like just for the people listening, if you've made it this far, like,
what percentage of our audience has probably gotten dizzy and just passed out?
No, the small percentage is excited about this though.
You can take a subject and map it, let's say, and then flat map it and whatever, and you get a subject back. You can next into, and when you next into it, it nexts into the top of that and goes all the way back down through. So it's a weird thing that not a lot of people use. We're moving away from it, or we've moved away from it rather. Because it's just not like, so that's one thing that Lift provides. And it provides that because Lift exists as a method on subject and it exists as a method on observable, and you can make them return different things. Now, that said, Lift, what it does is whenever you call an operator on an observable or pass an observable to an operator in our pipeable functions, it returns a new observable by calling Lift. And Lift says, create a new observable. And then I've got two kind of secret properties on there. One is called operator and the other one's called source. And I'm going to take the observable you gave me and I'm going to put it on source. And I'm going to take the operator, this underlying function that actually does the setup and execution for subscription of the operator, and put it on this operator property. And then when you subscribe to that resulting observable, there's a check in there that says, hey, does this have an operator? If it does, then take the source from it and subscribe, like pass it to that operator function and do the subscription. So, and it's kind of a neat way to take out a couple of superfluous calls or subscriptions and flatten things out a little bit. It served as an interesting way for us to kind of know, was this observable the product of an operator, or was it a hand-rolled observable? Now, that said, it was never intended as like a public API for people to use, really. Like it was like an internal implementation detail. And if we're shipping observable out to the masses and being like, here, folks, you want to use this observable, like they shouldn't have to know about Lift or that they have to use Lift to build an operator, like because they don't. Like realistically, you don't need to use Lift to build an operator.
But do you to build your own operator? Because I feel like I may have ran into a situation where I was trying to write a easy operator and it was like, did not implement Lift. And I'm like, what? Like some error or something that tried to call Lift that didn't exist? There's
probably some corner cases where you do need Lift, but yeah, like realistically, you should never have to, no external user needs to call Lift. Like if someone hits something like that, I would love to see the bug.
Well, not that they would have to call it, but that they'd have to actually like have it available to be called.
Right. Like it depends. Let me think about this. So right now, the only place that happens is in operate. So if somebody tried to bring out operate and build their own observable the way we build observables, yeah, that would, if their observable did not have Lift implemented, then it would choke.
You're just going to have a lot of regrets, Ben. Just like anytime you talk about something new in RxJS and everybody goes and does the thing that you don't expect them to do. Have fun!
Yeah.
No regrets,
Yep.
Ben. No
But
regrets.
it sounds to me like there's going to be smaller, more modular RxJS on the horizon with version 8.
Isn't that what RxJS is all about? Yeah.
It is. I mean, it is now.
Everyone can use.
That's so yeah. I mean, last version we reduced the size of the library by about almost 50%. This version should reduce it again. I would expect maybe like somewhere between 15 and 20% reduction just by the loss of all the deprecated code that we're removing. And ideally, we will have an observable library. It still might not be as lean as some library authors might want, but we'll deprecate things that don't need to be on it. Lyft is a solid example of that. And then, by a version or two from now, it'll be the smallest thing it can be. And our operators will be implemented in ways that so right now, when you look at the implementation of an operator, you go in and look and you'll see we have this operate function, we have this create operator subscriber function, and all of these things were kind of created to reduce the size of the library. But there's some ergonomic pieces to that. And there's another thing we want to do in version 8 is kind of productize that for other people. So if you want to build an operator like we do, you can build an operator like we do. But the thing about that is it needs, right now it's highly optimized for internals, right? It's like a function with 7 possible arguments, not super ergonomic. It needs some design work. It needs some thought put into it if we're going to be other people should use this. And then it also has to be something that we can re-implement our internals to use the same thing. So when someone says, "Oh, I wish I had an example of how to build map," you can be like, "All right, well, you build it like this right here." And that might increase the size of our library slightly. But the whole point is to be here's a point of reference for you to go implement this thing yourself. Any one of these operators could and should be standalone,
Well, I'm excited about that. And I think we are doing a state of RxJS at some point in time soon too. And I don't know when this episode will be released, but you should probably all check out RxJS and just kind of see all the exciting things that are happening in the library, and help Ben.
Do help me. I am very receptive. We've got a newer contributor guy from Ukraine that's been contributing an awful lot.
Amazing.
I think it's Demensky or something is his name.
And
anyway.
You're not complaining, which means he's doing a good job.
Yeah, he's doing a great job.
This contributor over here. We finally reject his PRs.
That we finally hit the point where we stopped getting people showing up and be like, I have this new, it's called timer switch exhaust zip operator, and I want to add that to RxJS. And I'm just and they've put in 3 weeks of work on it, and you can tell, and you're just I feel so bad telling this person that it should just be their own library.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And again, everyone check out, I think it's github.com/reactivex/RxJS if you want to check out RxJS. If you're not using it, you definitely should. And well, you see Ben on this podcast every other week-ish anyway. So I guess, Ben, we'll see you soon. And
keep your eyes peeled for releases of the alpha and beta stuff. We're releasing it. If you install it, it'd be npm install RxJS at next. So
yeah. When you say peeled, is it because you're referencing my banana dress that I'm wearing?
Keep your bananas peeled.
Peeled. All right, everybody.
It's very appealing, Tracy.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm
that thought yellow. Slipped away from you.
I think
y'all.
Always in with puns. None of these questions anymore. Always with puns.
Always monkeying with the puns.
Okay, everybody. Well, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.